torpedo that sunk the Cheonan and took the lives of 46 South Korean sailors was fired by a North Korean submarine.
North Korea's weapons program.
Homefront owes a lot of its hype to its depiction of a Korean invasion of the United States. Reports that the invading force was originally supposed to be Chinese, and that Japanese versions of the game eliminate any mention of North Korea, only add to Homefront's mystique. But does this game have the goods to back up all the hype? Or is it just another first-person shooter to keep you occupied while a sequel to one of the more well-established titles is released? It's true, the game does a great job of conveying the struggles of war, and the premise is great for a shooter. While it's not a perfect experience, the thrilling and emotional battles and entertaining multiplayer are plenty to keep even the most timid first-person shooter fan excited, if only for a little while. While the game focuses on a small group of American rebels, cleverly called the Resistance, Homefront deals with some major real-life problems. Increasing fuel prices, wars in the Middle East, and US border control are all hot themes in Homefront. The story is fairly interesting, but again, the real draw is the overall premise and general war ambiance. You play as a former pilot, recruited by the Resistance in Montrose, Colorado. The events in the next 5 or 6 hours of the single-player campaign take you from the suburbs to rural settings, up into the sky, and into a devastated city.
After the president ordered a freeze on bank withdrawals.
Run!
There's a tremendous amount of detail put into the game's premise. You truly feel like this is a war on America's western shores. Citizens are imprisoned in camps, and those that manage to live on their own must constantly hide from the Korean People's Army. Modern fast food restaurants, retailers, and famous landmarks are all used to remind players that they are fighting this war in a familiar setting. That's not to say the level of detail put into the game's premise means there's a ton of detail in the graphics. Yes, the graphics are muted to look like a war zone, but everything ends up looking tired and repetitive. Battles are largely guerrilla warfare style, fought in urban jungles or in rural farms. The game doesn't do a great job of differentiating these contrasting settings, and while the overall ambiance is terrific, it all becomes a bit bland. There isn't much to say about the dialogue. It's rather typical for a shooter, but I really enjoyed the Voice of Freedom radio broadcast during load screens. Again, this radio broadcaster helps draw players into this revolution at home.
This land will be our land again.
The premise of a game means very little if the gameplay is broken. Homefront's gameplay is certainly not broken, but it's not quite on the level of other shooters. Everything about the gameplay is extremely basic. There's no duck and cover system, and there appears to be some issues with hit detection. Luckily, there's a decent variety in level design and pacing. Again, you get all the basics like stealth and sniper missions, massive battles, and even a couple of vehicle combat segments. There's a pretty extensive level in which you get to fly a helicopter. You are a former pilot after all, and this offers a great break from the standard gun battles. Vehicle combat is not perfect, but it has its moments. One of the biggest problems with Homefront has to do with its poor AI. Your fellow Resistance fighters act more like obstacles rather than actual comrades. Most of the story is told through in-game scripted dialogue sequences, and if you happen to stand in the wrong location, one of the characters may just push you out of the way. This is a pretty basic problem, but during combat it only gets worse. If, for instance, you are crouched behind cover and a teammate is standing behind you, they won't get out of your way when you try to run from an oncoming grenade. Your AI partners get stuck trying to run through walls too. Again, a basic problem, but it draws attention away from this terrific ambience. To put it simply, the single-player campaign is entertaining and extremely exciting, but it's now without its frustrations. Multiplayer, on the other hand, now that's quite solid. The gameplay elements remain unchanged, but there's one unique component to keep Homefront feeling fresh. The battle point system allows players to acquire different perks by killing opponents and meeting various objectives. These points can be spent on things like armor, or you can save your points through a single match and spend them on a Humvee or a helicopter. This allows new players to save up points and hop into a tank to blast away more experienced players. It's a refreshing take on perks, and a system that shows great promise. There are essentially two different multiplayer modes, a team deathmatch and the objective-based ground control. Ground control supports up to 32 players with dedicated servers. You will eventually gain access to battle commander missions. These are the same style as deathmatch and ground control, but they include a commander that provides different objectives. You'll get 6 different maps: They offer slight variations, and unfortunately, the themes from the single-player campaign seem to get lost in the multiplayer. Still, 32-player sessions run great, and playing with real-life comrades is a lot better than playing with the game's AI. Homefront is a solid game, filled with memorable moments and exciting action. There is plenty here to keep just about any first-person shooter fan satisfied. The problems I mentioned earlier are really not all that bad. The game needs a bit more work, but this is a great starting point for a new series. If you are ready to peek into a twisted future and play a game with tried and trusted mechanics, you may just be ready to join the resistance.
Our soldiers need any and all resources we can provide to help them defeat the occupation. Use these encoded radio channels to communicate. I will, as always, be here as your conduit. This is the voice of freedom.